thank you so much again, everyone, for coming. This is our first Solidarity Series call. I'm really excited about them. We've got this one tonight, and then two more on the subject of justice and liberation in Palestine. Um, the second call will be on April 9th, and the third will be on April 23rd. Both of those will be on Blue Jeans at the same exact link, and at 9:15 Eastern instead of 9:30. Those are going to be occurring. Those are going to be occurring during the normal Youth Caucus Education Committee calls. So our April is going to be devoted to this series. For those of you who don't know, the Youth Caucus Education Committee does bi-monthly calls. We have one more of those calls coming up this month on Monday the 26th, and it'll be Melisa Figueroa of the Campus Anti-Fascist Network, and she'll be talking about campus anti-fascist action. So we do those the second and fourth Monday of every month at 9:15 Eastern. So Miko just jumped on. Miko, we just did introductions. I'm going to mute everybody real quick, and then I will unmute you so that we're ready to go. And then you can kind of start with an introduction to your, of yourself and go from there. You can talk however much you want. If there's a point you want to stop and open for discussion, just let me know and I'll unmute everybody and we'll do stack.
Okay.
But I'm going to mute everybody real quick and then I'll give you the go when you're unmuted.
Give me 1 second.
You are good to go, Miko.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. How many people do we have on with us here?
About 20 right now.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Well, good evening, everyone. And glad you could all join. So, my understanding is that I'm going to start with a little intro about Palestine, about the issue of Palestine, maybe a little bit about the history of the issue of Palestine, and so forth. If you don't know me, my name is Miko Peled. I'm the author of a book called The General Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. And I just published a second book called Injustice, The Story of the Holy Land, Foundation 5. And I was born and raised in Jerusalem as an Israeli. My father was a general. That's why the book is called The General Son. And then I took this journey as an Israeli into Palestine, which is an interesting journey because it's geographically a very short journey, but it is politically, emotionally, an impossible journey, a journey that very few people take, because we're taught that the Palestinians are dangerous, the Palestinians are enemies, the Palestinians want to kill us, the Palestinians are, all the different things that people say about the other. But it forced me to see, this journey forced me to see that there is an Israel which is a part that was, it's a part of Palestine, but it's a part that was imposed upon Palestine. And it was a sphere that was created in order to accommodate colonizers. And I grew up in that sphere, which is very nice and clean and safe and beautiful. There's plenty of water and the roads are paved well and everything. And then taking the journey, which is really a 5 or 10 minute journey geographically into where Palestinians live, the reality is completely different, to the point where I was forced to wonder what is going on here. Why are the differences so striking? In other words, it's more than just culture, because we used to think, well, we're Europeans, they're Arabs, and so we're a little bit more advanced than they are, and so on. But it's more than that. I mean, it was obviously that there's a reality that was imposed upon the Palestinians, where they have less access to water, they have less, the laws under which they live are different, the rights that they enjoy, they enjoy fewer rights than I do as an Israeli Jew, and so on. So that journey was an opportunity for me to see that there are actually two different types of population living in what I thought was Israel, but turns out is Palestine. And that is the sphere of the colonizer oppressor and the sphere of the indigenous colonized, which are the Palestinians. And it didn't really matter whether or not they were living in parts of the country that were considered Israel, in other words, they were Israeli citizens, or if they were living in parts of the country that were considered occupied, like what used to be the West Bank and so forth. The problems were very similar. The reality is very similar. Whether you go into a Palestinian town in the Negev Desert, where you have hundreds of thousands of people without access to basic most services like roads and water and electricity, where ambulances don't come in when there's an emergency, and these are Israeli citizens. So in many cases, those realities and those environments are worse than what are called the occupied territories, which is a really strange term. And basically, to get to the end of that, the final conclusion of what I realized was that all of Israel is occupied Palestine. There is no part of Israel that is not built on occupied Palestine. It's just that it was done. Most of it was done. The larger portion of the occupation took place in 1948 when Israel was established, and for reasons really beyond understanding, that became completely acceptable and completely legitimized, even though the vast majority of the damage that was done to Palestinians was done at that time, when close to 1 million people were forced out, hundreds of towns and villages were wiped off the map, and really the country was given a new name and a new identity and a new reality as this thing called Israel. And the world accepted it. The world was willing to legitimize that. Then in 1967, there were two little parts of Palestine which Israel left out for reasons that had nothing to do with the Palestinians, but had everything to do with internal Israeli politics. And then 20 years later, 1967 came around, and they decided to take those two parts, and they were named the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Now, these are two areas that don't have any natural boundaries or any characteristics that make them unique. It's just that at some point somebody sat with a map and said, well, this area here we're going to call the West Bank, and this area here we're going to make a strip, and we're going to call it the Gaza Strip. And these people that did this were Israelis, of course. So that was the reality that was established. Like I said, 67 came around, those areas were taken as well, and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were kicked out, their homes were destroyed, their towns and villages were destroyed, and settlements for Jews only were built. So really there's no difference between all the different parts of Palestine, because they all became Israel as a result of a campaign of conquest and then ethnic cleansing and then a building and colonizing for Jews only. So when people say Israel proper, you wonder what's proper about Israel or any part of Israel. When people say occupied Palestinian territories, you wonder, well, which part of Palestinian territories are not occupied? They're all occupied. It's just they were occupied at different times. And then again, the realization that it's all Palestine, and people who care for Palestine and people who are not willing to accept racism, are not willing to accept violence, are not willing to accept colonialism, settler colonialism, need to stop legitimizing Israel and stop calling the country Israel, but call it by its name, which is Palestine. The name Israel was given to it by colonizers, by people who have committed great crimes. And so if we accept it, we're legitimizing it. So I usually invite people to call the country Palestine and its people Palestinians. Now, trying to describe what actually went on or what goes on in Palestine over the last 7 decades, so there are several terms that I like to use that I believe are appropriate. I believe the genocide is appropriate. And of course, that is one term that creates a great deal of anger and resentment, mostly on the other side. But even among people who oppose the state of Israel, you hear people say, well, Jews would never commit genocide. And so it's a very easy argument to make, and it's a very easy argument to prove, because we have the Geneva Convention, which has defined the crime of genocide. And so if you take a look, and it's easy to look it up on, Google it and look it up, you see the Geneva Convention, you see the definition of the crime of genocide, and you compare that to what's been happening in Palestine for the last 7 decades, and somebody can stand up and tell me how it's different. The destruction of a land, the destruction of a people, the renaming of a country and places, the erasure of history, and on and on and on. And of course, when we look at a place like Gaza, for example, the Gaza Strip, where we have 2 million people living without access to clean water, 2 million people without access to medical care, knowing full well that there are tens of thousands among them who are injured by Israeli bombing and have no access to medical care. And then, of course, you have people with just disease that need health care, medical care. So if you're not going to kill somebody by shooting them, denying them care and denying them clean water is a sure way to kill them. So how is that not genocide? I don't know. And we know very well that a child with a curable cancer in the Gaza Strip will die. A child with the exact same curable cancer a couple of miles away on the other side of the border in Israel will live. And it's only because Israel decides who has access to care. So how is that not genocide? And then, and again, the Gaza Strip is one example. Again, if we look at the Nakab Desert, we see the Palestinian Bedouin communities. They also have no access to clean water, and you see the diseases. You see in the summer, you see the hospitals filled with children with all kinds of diseases that you don't see among Israeli children who also live in the Nakab Desert in Jewish-only communities, where there's plenty of clean water and access to medical care. So again, if you're not going to kill somebody by shooting them, denying them water, denying them access to care, medical care is a sure way to kill them. And again, it goes on in other parts of the country as well. When we talk about ethnic cleansing, we know that in 1948 close to 1 million people were forced out of their homes. We know they were not allowed to return. We know that today there are about 5 million refugees living in refugee camps in and around Palestine. We know that they are banned from returning to their homes, that Israel will not allow them to return to their homes, and that's why they're living in squalor, in horrifying conditions in camps for 7 decades now. How is that not ethnic cleansing? I grew up in Jerusalem, in the west side of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem used to be one city. Then in 1948, and in 1947, I should say, when Palestine was divided, the city of Jerusalem was left alone. It did not belong, it did not become a part of either the Palestinian state or a Jewish state. It was left alone because of its unique position. Israel disregarded that and occupied the western part of the city and made it its own. Now, I grew up in that part of the city, and I didn't know that there were ever Palestinians in that part of the city. The ethnic cleansing of the western side of Jerusalem was complete, 100%. Not one Palestinian family was allowed to remain, and there are entire neighborhoods that used to be Palestinian, entire communities within the city that used to be Palestinian, and we know because we call them Arab homes. We look at these beautiful structures that were Arab homes that were built by Palestinians. They are still called beautiful Arab homes, but the Arabs are nowhere to be seen, and nobody ever asked the question, so where are the Arabs? And then we look at what is happening in East Jerusalem since 1967, a vicious campaign of destruction of Palestinian identity, Palestinian names, and Palestinians themselves are being forced out, and their homes are being destroyed, their neighborhoods are being destroyed, as new neighborhoods and communities for Jews only are being built in their place. So, having been born in Jerusalem as an Israeli Jew, I have an Israeli citizenship. I can come and go as I please. I've been gone for 20 years. If I decide to go back tomorrow, I can still go back to my home and live there. Palestinians who are from Jerusalem only have an alien resident status. And if they leave for more than a few years, they lose that status, taken away from them. And then they lose their property, and that's the end of the story. And that's, of course, an attempt to get rid of Palestinians. Again, that's part of that ethnic cleansing. If we look at there's one community in East Jerusalem by the old city, which is called Silwan, which is probably the most striking example of ethnic cleansing because it's right in the center. It's the highest profile place probably in the world, the old city of Jerusalem, or right outside it. And we can see house by house, alley by alley, street by street, how they're taken over by settlers. Homes are being destroyed because they're digging under the homes in Silwan, looking for the city of David, King David. And they've built an archaeological park called the City of David. So tour buses actually go there and they see this process. It's done in broad daylight. So you can see the ethnic cleansing taking place in broad daylight. And then there are entire neighborhoods, again, and communities around the city. There used to be thriving communities that were attached to the city of Jerusalem. Kalandia and Aram and several others. And they are ghost towns, complete ghost towns. Buildings are empty, shops are empty, businesses are empty, houses are empty, gone. Complete ghost towns. And then you see the wall cutting them on one side, Jewish-only highways cutting them on the other side, and Jewish-only communities being built on the land everywhere. So we see the ethnic cleansing, we see the apartheid, we see the genocide, and all three are easily defined because they've all been defined by international law. So all you have to do is Google and you find the exact definition of apartheid, the exact definition of ethnic cleansing, and how somebody can stand up and say that Israel is not engaged in all three, is absurd. Because it's engaged in genocide, it's engaged in ethnic cleansing, and it's maintaining an apartheid regime in which I have rights that Palestinians, even if they have Israeli citizenship like I do not enjoy. And there are dozens of laws in the Israeli law books that discriminate specifically against the Palestinians who are citizens of the State of Israel, not to mention Palestinians who are not. And their treatment and their right to work and their ability to get jobs and education and resources and on and on and on are entirely different than the reality that exists for Israeli Jews, even though they live in a very, very close proximity. And many of the Israeli towns and neighborhoods sit on the land of Palestinian communities who are forced into smaller and smaller and smaller spaces. So that's a reality that exists today. Now, people talk a lot about Palestinian solidarity and the rise of Palestinian solidarity among Jews here in the United States and so forth. And, I go to Palestine a lot. I was just there a few weeks ago again. And what I see is a patient bleeding to death. I see an injured human being bleeding to death. And the best that the world can do is stand there and cheer him on and say, hey, you know what? We're right with you. We're with you, brother. You hang in there. We're with you. That's solidarity. What this injured human being needs is not solidarity, not somebody to stand there and say, we're with you. What they need is urgent care. They need urgent first aid. And unless we step up and we organize, and unless we get on board with boycott, divestment, and sanctions, it's not going to happen. The patient is bleeding fast. Palestine is dying very rapidly. The last year with Trump, that has become even more. It's become even more rapid. The blood is gushing at even greater quantities and greater speed. The Jerusalem Declaration has emboldened the Israelis to a point that I don't think anybody could have anticipated they could be even more cruel than they were before that. That was, besides being reckless, it was a declaration. That declaration was a personal political gift from Donald Trump to Benjamin Netanyahu, and it made him basically untouchable and undefeatable. And so we're looking at a reality where solidarity is far, far, far from being enough. Far. I mean, the solidarity is, even though it is growing, it's not great. But it is far, far from being enough. The patient is bleeding to death very rapidly. We are losing the patient. We're losing Jerusalem. We're losing Palestine. We're losing Palestinians. You have cities like Hebron, the old city of Hebron, where settlers have always been violent. Settlers have always been bold. Settlers have always been allowed or given leeway to act with enormous violence and brutality towards Palestinians, and things are even worse now, which is hard to believe. The Palestinians are being completely squeezed out of their homes, out of their land, out of their rights. Shops are closed. The army is everywhere. Palestinians can't breathe. And again, just standing there and cheering them on and saying, hey, you hang in there is not good enough anymore. So embracing boycott, divestment, and sanctions, making clear to every elected politician, whether it's a city council or a mayor or a sheriff or a judge or a member of Congress, that unless they support boycott, divestment, and sanctions, unless they support sanctions against Israel, unless they stop supporting Israel, they will not be reelected. They will not be elected, is crucial. And unless each and every one of us gets organized, talks to their friends, talk to their neighbors, organize little groups of BDS action groups, then nothing is going to change. Unless Israel is forced to its knees, like apartheid South Africa was forced to its knees, through isolation and sanctions, then nothing is going to change. Nothing at all is going to change. Israel has made these alliances now with Saudi Arabia, with this new crown prince of Saudi Arabia, bin Salman, who's going around the world purchasing weapons. I was in London now. There was a protest against him, but he was visiting. He just struck a deal purchasing billions of pounds worth of weapons, which we know he uses in his own little genocide against Yemen, in his bombing of Yemen. And he's being paraded as though he's some kind of enlightened Arab, which we all know he's not. And he's very happy and quite willing to do business with Israel, all the way to a point where everybody's anticipating that the day where there are actual diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel are upon us, and something that people are expecting will happen very soon. There's an alliance with Egypt. Of course, there's a peace agreement with Egypt, a brutal, vicious dictator. There's an alliance with Jordan, again, a reactionary monarchy. We're being told that the problem is in Iran for some reason, again, that hard to explain. But Iran is an easy smokescreen to say, yeah, the bad guys are over there. Look, they're vicious, they're tyrannical, they're radical Muslims. How are the Egyptians not tyrannical and dictatorial? How are the Saudis not so? But it all depends on how they view Israel and their willingness to collaborate with Israel and throw the Palestinians under the bus. The Iranians still stand up for the Palestinians. They still reject Zionism. They still reject the state of Israel, and therefore they're the enemy. Hezbollah, in Lebanon, dare to stand up to Israel, dare to fight Israel, dares to put Lebanon first, and therefore they're the enemy. Of course, the Palestinians must be the enemy. And there in Netanyahu, in his speech here in D.C. at AIPAC last week, made it very, very clear that Iraq, Syria, Iran, Yemen, Palestine, all these different groups, which he doesn't like, are all the enemy. And that's really sums up American foreign policy now. So I think we're looking at some very dangerous times ahead of us. I think things have come to a point where they're far worse than anybody anticipated they would be. Again, I'll say it again. The patient is dying. The patient is bleeding rapidly, and it's time for urgent care. And I believe that urgent care is BDS. I think boycott, divestment, and sanction is urgent care. Israel needs to know, and it goes beyond, boycotting this product or that, although those are extremely important things to do. But it goes to a point where an Israeli diplomat should know that whenever they show up, there's going to be a protest. Any event that represents the state of Israel should be faced with protest, should be faced with rejection. Israel should not be allowed to play in the Olympics, should not be allowed to participate in the World Cup, should not be allowed to participate in any cultural or sporting events. This is exactly the kind of isolation. The academic boycott, crucially important. This is exactly the urgent care. Until Israelis understand that they can no longer live a normal life while their Palestinians neighbors are dying of thirst and being tortured in the dungeons of the Israeli secret police, then they're not going to stop. They will only stop if their life is disrupted to a point where they have no choice. like the whites in South Africa. Um, there's the McCullum bill that I'm sure all of you have heard of. The first time that actually the issue of Palestine and the rights of Palestinian children are being raised in on a level, on this kind of a level. There were all these members of Congress and senators who were speaking at the AIPAC convention. Of course, none of them talked about that. None of them are going to sponsor that. Everybody's got to make sure that their own members of Congress, their own representatives, support the McCullum bill. At least that, at least have one space for Palestinians where they can feel safe. It's their children. And again, if you want to make sure that people get up and leave, you make sure that their children are tortured, that their children are suffering, and that their children do not have a future. That's another tactic that's part of the ethnic cleansing. Because obviously, if our children are suffering, we will do everything we can to help them, even if it means to get up and go. The Palestinians who do stay are doing so in spite of all of that, which is quite heroic. And again, I'm very proud that the Green Party has embraced BDS. The Green Party has embraced the one-state the democratic solution, which is really the only realistic solution to the oppression in Palestine. It is the only solution that offers justice to Palestine and to Palestinians. And when people talk about that solution, or when they talk about BDS being anti-Semitic, it's important to stand up and say this is not anti-Semitic. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. If we look at the demands of the BDS call, it's justice and equality and freedom. How is any of that anti-Semitic? Calling for the right of return, calling for the end of the military occupation, calling for equal rights. Where exactly is the anti-Semitism? Where it doesn't even mention Jews. It doesn't talk about expelling or killing or deporting or anything like that. Quite the opposite. It talks about remedy. It talks about remedial steps to bring back the Palestinians, to allow them to live a life of normalcy and dignity. And the same thing with the claim that if we speak against the Zionist state, if we call for the end of the Zionist state, if we call to replace the Zionist state with a real democracy, that is somehow calling for genocide, it's calling for killing Jews, it's calling for another Holocaust. That's complete nonsense. The jumping from this to that is what the Zionists want people to do, but there's no connection between the two. The state of Israel is an illegitimate entity. It does not have the right to exist. Doesn't mean the Jews don't have a right to exist. Doesn't mean the Jews need to die or be killed. The Jews in Palestine, or Israelis like myself, we're like the whites in South Africa. The reality has created this strange phenomenon, and now we're there. It's like the whites in South Africa. They're there. They're part of the landscape. That's the reality. However, they do not get to be privileged. They do not get to be oppressors. They do not get to deny Palestinians their rights, and their right to life, and their right to water, and their right to live a life of normalcy and dignity. So that's, I believe, where I think our strength lies. Our strength lies in the fact that we can organize. Our strength lies in the fact that we do know what's right, that we do understand that all of the claims of anti-Semitism are nonsense. We just need to step up and make sure that we make this clear. We need to step up and make sure that we understand the issue well, and we know how to articulate it well. Because when the questions come up and the accusations come up, it's important to look them in the eye and say, this is not true. The entire foundation of the State of Israel is based on racism, violence, and lies that justify the racism and the violence and cover them up somehow. And I think it's important to be able to say that. It's important to recognize that. And quite frankly, it should become a mantra. The racism, the violence, and the lies have no room there's no room for them. They're not acceptable. There should be no tolerance for them. There's always this debate about listening to the other side and hearing the other side. If the other side represents racism and violence and expresses lies after lies and repeating the lies, then they have no seat at the table. We don't need to be tolerant of that. Just like we wouldn't be tolerant of the KKK or any other racist ideology, a violent ideology. And so again, this is our platform. This is our strength. Organizing is crucial. Being out there is crucial. Being clear and direct and honest is crucial. And supporting the cause for justice in Palestine, supporting the method of BDS, And of course, there are many other methods that Palestinians use on the ground. Many wonderful organizations, Youth Against Settlements, and others in Hebron and others country. Great leaders all over Palestine that do tremendous work and are being punished. Isa Amro is one from Youth Against Settlement. We know about Ahid Tamimi and her father Bassem, and her mother was in jail with her. And there are many, many others, and I'm sure you've heard of them. And so it's important to support them in every way that we possibly can and allow them to have a platform, because these are the people who are telling the truth. These are people who represent real Palestine and really represent the Palestinian issue, as opposed to, say, the Palestinian Authority, which are really a bunch of collaborators that work with Israel and don't represent anyone. So that's important as well. And that's it. I think if we do our job, then there's a chance for Palestine to be free. There's a chance for a democratic Palestine to emerge. And the X factor is, the question is, how long is it going to take, and how many Palestinians are going to have to die and suffer until then? And that depends on us. We're the ones with the privilege. We're the ones with the power. We're the ones who pay the taxes. It's our tax money that's going to Israel, close to $4 billion and growing every year, every single year. And so we need to act. And the faster we act, and the more fierce we are in our actions, and the more clear and determined we are in our actions, the faster it's going to be. It's not going to be a miracle. It's not going to be an act of God. It's going to be us doing all the hard work, expecting to be smeared, expecting to be called anti-Semitic, expecting to see, because the other side, they're not going to roll over and die. They're going to fight. But we need to be there. We need to gear up. We need to, really, really prepare for this fight, because it's the right fight. And when Palestine is free and liberated and democratic, and people in Palestine who live in Palestine can live a normal life of dignity, then we can all, be proud to say, we had something to do with it. We played some small part in accomplishing that, and I think that is something worth living for. So that's it. I'll end my remarks right there, and let's go from there. Thank you.
You out there, Chris? All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to unmute everybody in a second to do Stack. If you want to be on Stack, go ahead and say your name and Stack, and I'll try to get you. You can also type it into the chat box, and I'll see it. And we'll go through, I'll get a Stack, we'll go through that, and then if there's more comment, we can always open up the Stack again, so it's not a one-time shot thing. So everyone is unmuted. If you would like to be on Stack, say Stack and your name.
Hi, Adrian Stack.
Okay, Adrian. Anybody
Hi,
else?
hold on, Chris. I wanted to perhaps encourage Miko to maybe speak on the point that we were particularly, as the working group, interested in hearing about, based on his impressions, which is, in light of everything he shared with us, Miko, what would be your insight, for the condition of the youth in particular, given everything that's happened recently, but also given the fact that, so if you could speak maybe a few more minutes on how the occupation and how the injustice is actually impacting young people and their futures and their perceptions of the future and what that is leading to in terms of the psychological and emotional and physical impact, not just on them, but on their families once they join the resistance and either get hurt, tortured, or imprisoned without due process. So before we moved on, Chris, to opening it up, I wanted to maybe ask Miko if he could talk to us a little bit about that. Over.
Sure.
That's fine with me.
like I said earlier, I think it's clear that if you want to get rid of a community, one sure way of doing that is harming their children. People who think their children are going to be harmed in any way, shape, or form, that they will not have a future, will get up and leave. So I believe that's a tactic that's used, that's been used, for a very long time. This continues to be used even more broadly by Israel than ever before. Israel is known to detain and arrest somewhere between around 500 children per year. Most of them, and we're not talking about, they don't get the treatment as juveniles. They get the treatment of adult terrorists, basically. They're called security prisoners. And so they're they have no access to an attorney. They don't have no access to their families, to their parents. They are interrogated and tortured by vicious secret police and military interrogators. They are in facilities that are not appropriate for children. What's interesting is that in the 3 weeks after Donald Trump's December declaration about Jerusalem, so like I said, typically they'll arrest about 500 per year. In the 3 weeks since his declaration, they arrested close to 100 children in 3 weeks. And again, arrest means, and I'm sure many of you know this, arrest means they bang on the door or kick the door down at 2 o'clock in the morning. 15, 20 armed commandos with ski masks and semi-automatics, guns, semi-automatic rifles invade the home, yank everybody out of their beds, check everybody's ID, destroy whatever is in the way, find the kid that they particularly want that particular day, or 2 kids, or whoever it is, throw them in a Jeep, kick them around until they get to the interrogation center, and then, the interrogation begins, and the interrogations go for hours. Sleep deprivation, food deprivation, exposure to heat and cold, extreme heat and cold, and we're talking about children. And there is a complete disregard to the fact that these are children. I mean, nobody cares. They're Palestinians, they're little rats, they're little terrorists, and that's how they're treated. Whether they're released the next day, the next month, the next year, nobody knows. It all depends on the kind of punishment they want to exact. And the thing is, we're not even talking about a trial. This is all pre-trial. This is even before they're charged. Typically, they won't let them see a lawyer, and they won't start a trial until they confess. And whether they confess or not, or at least point a finger towards somebody. And this is what they do a lot. They use kids to point fingers at other people so they can go and arrest them and say, well, we have somebody's statement that points to you as being, rabble rouser, as being an organizer of something or other. And then, like in the case of Ahid Tamimi, who we all heard about, there's no reason for her to be in jail because until the trial began, which was about over a month. The trial then began. They had one hearing, and the next hearing was scheduled for another month away. Why can't she go home? Why does she have to be in jail during this time? She's not charged of blowing anything up, anything dangerous. But the judge said to her in the hearing before the trial began, after she'd already been in jail for some 3 weeks, she and her mother, by the way, that because she is maintaining her right to remain silent, she is dangerous and she will be kept in jail. So we all know that you have a right to remain silent when you're being questioned, it's not questioned, it's interrogated. She's being interrogated. And so the judge clearly said to her, because she maintains her right to remain silent, she's being punished, and she will remain in jail until the trial and until the end of the trial. Why? Why is this acceptable? And then, of course, the following hearing, the press was not allowed, and it was no longer allowed to be in the courtroom. How is it that this is even acceptable? How is it that all the governments of the world are not standing up and demanding an end to this torture of children? This is torture. She's 17 years old. This is torture. And it doesn't matter whether the fact she's strong or not strong, or she's holding up or she's not holding up. I mean, I don't know if I would hold up under those conditions. I mean, nobody knows until you're there. These are harsh, harsh conditions. And again, there's sleep deprivation. There's the questioning that takes hours and hours and hours. Sitting in the jeep, going from the detention center to the interrogation center to the dungeons of the secret police where they do the questioning. This is torture. And there is absolutely no reason in the world why Israel should be allowed to get away with this. And we're talking about, overall, we're talking about thousands and thousands of children. 500 per year, you multiply that by all the years that Israel has been doing this to Palestinians. And again, Israel gets away with it. Nobody at AIPAC talked about it. Nobody in Senate talks about it. Of course, now we have the McCollum bill, which is, again, the first time that this issue is being raised, or any issue actually that pertains to Palestinian rights is being raised in the House of Representatives in a serious way. So this is a reality, and again, we have Ahet Tamimi now, so everybody saw this. We have her cousin who was, who we met, I met with some friends in Nabi Saleh a few weeks ago, and not a few weeks ago, I'm sorry, in October, a few months ago. And a few weeks ago, he was shot. Half of his skull had to be cut out, and then he was arrested again and slapped around. It's beyond belief. It's beyond belief. A kid who had to go through surgery, whose skull had to be opened to take out the bullet, is being dragged out and being to an interrogation center by the Israeli military. I mean, just think of how horrendous this is. And these are just a couple of cases that we all happen to hear about. This is happening. Every single friend that I have either has a child who's injured in the hospital or in jail, or is wanted. Diane, you remember we saw, Muhammad Tamimi were walking down the street in Abi Saleh when we were there. So I mean, it's a reality that is there, that's been there for a very long time. And until we rise, until we stand up, until we make it absolutely clear that this is unacceptable, until we make it absolutely clear that the entire argument that somehow this is justifiable in any way, shape, or form, until we stand up and make it clear that it is unacceptable and that Israel cannot and should not and must be allowed to continue this way, it's not going to stop. It will never stop. It will absolutely never stop unless the entire establishment of the State of Israel and Israeli society are brought to their knees. Because Israel, remember, for Israeli Jews, it's a democratic, liberal democratic reality. They vote for these people. Israelis vote. Israelis participate in the process. And this is what they vote for, and they're the ones executing this. In the military, in the secret police, these are guys like any, just normal people that serve. And everybody knows a brother or a sister or somebody who was involved in this. So it's not like some, tyrannical regimes where you don't know who the secret police are, and you didn't vote for the regime. The Israelis voted for these people in large numbers. They fully support what they do. So the entire establishment and the entire society need to be brought down to their knees and to be made to understand that the treatment, this is, the campaign, no way to treat a child. This is no way to treat a child. There's no way to treat any human being, but particularly not a child. So that's the reality. It is absolutely horrendous. And Israel there was a demand that Israel begin to use special facilities for minors. And so they said, fine, we will use special facilities for minors, except that they didn't. So the facilities and interrogators and the right to see an attorney and on and on and on are exactly the same as the ones that are used for adults. I mean, there is absolutely no difference whatsoever. And even those are horrendous. So that's the reality. That's the reality for Palestinian youth. And they stand and they protest and they're not afraid, but they pay a heavy, heavy price. And more parents are not willing to see their kids, live like this. More and more parents are not willing for their kids to live in this reality. And that's a sure way to get them to leave.
Thank you. I've got a couple people who have requested Stack via the chat. You can do that. I am. Everybody else is also should be unmuted. If you would like to get on Stack, go ahead and say Stack and your name. So far, I've got it. Adrian, did you want to be on Stack beyond that initial?
No, thank you. I'm, I'm here just for the support. So thank you very much, Chris. Pass.
Thank you. Okay, so I have Edward, Diane, and David. Anybody else want on? And Brendan. Anybody else want on Stack? Okay. Edward asked via the chat if you could elaborate on the declaration of Jerusalem and the opening of the embassy, and how, as a party, the Green Party can, work to oppose that and reverse that.
Well, I think it's important to first of all understand the unique situation in Jerusalem. So, like I said, when Palestine was divided in 1947 into an Arab and a Jewish state, Jerusalem was left as an independent sovereign entity. It was not under the sovereignty of either state. Israel disregarded that. It took the western part of the city, made it its own. The ethnic cleansing was complete, and that became the capital city of Israel. No one recognized it. Now, there are no embassies in Jerusalem because all of the countries that did establish diplomatic relations with Israel opened their embassies in Tel Aviv, again, because Jerusalem was not recognized, and the conquest of Jerusalem was not recognized. There are consular offices in Jerusalem, but most of them, including the U.S. consular office in Jerusalem, predate the state of Israel. They were all established in the 18th, 19th centuries when Jerusalem began to become prominent again, and everybody, especially the Christian countries, wanted a foothold. So they opened consular, missions in Jerusalem. The consul general in Jerusalem, unlike all other cities around the world, does not report to the ambassador in Tel Aviv. He's not part of the U.S. mission to Israel. He is the de facto ambassador in Palestine, because again, it's not a part of Israel. So it's a unique situation that Jerusalem is in, which is like no other city. Now that's just the legal and diplomatic aspect of the city. There's another reality is that there has been an Arab and a Muslim city for some 1,500 years. And there can be no question that the western part of the city, that reality has completely disappeared. Israel has destroyed any sign that this was an Arab and Muslim city. But the eastern part of the city, East Jerusalem, is still very much, particularly the old city, is still very much an Arab and a Muslim city, and that is being destroyed day by day, minute by minute. Now, the declaration not only legitimizes what Israel did in Jerusalem, it legitimizes what Israel has been doing all over Palestine, which is de-Arabizing it and Judaizing it. And as a party, the Green Party needs to stand in opposition to that entire process and to stand, of course, with the Palestinians in recognizing that there is no legitimacy to the entire state of Israel as an entity. And certainly there can be no legitimacy to a declaration that says that Jerusalem is the capital city of this illegitimate entity, which is a racist settler colonial entity. Because we are talking about a Green Party which believes in progressive ideals and does respect the call for BDS and so forth. So I believe that's the stance. The stance has to be absolutely clear that this declaration is unacceptable. Besides, it's reckless. It's illegal. People are talking about perhaps using the American consulate in Jerusalem as the embassy, but again, you can't do that because the consulate in Jerusalem, like I said, does not report to the embassy. It is not connected to the embassy. It's an entity that belongs to Palestine, to a different era, to a whole different reality. And again, as a party, this is something that has to be made clear. People need to be aware of this reality. People need to be educated and to understand why this is so important. And, Jerusalem is the heart of the Arab and Muslim world. There's no question about that. It's the third holiest city in Islam. It is the heart of the Arab and the Muslim world. And defiling it, as Israel does, by allowing settlers and soldiers into the holiest places in Jerusalem, is horrifying. And they do it more and more all the time and every day. And their willingness to destroy monuments and to change names and to change the appearance of the city is very strong, and and they have the ability to do it as well. So it's extremely important to stand against it and to make it very, very clear that there cannot be any legitimacy given to this process.
Thank you. Diane, you're next. Go ahead.
Format. So, okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, and I just wanted to quick comment. I had the life-altering experience of the trip with Miko and a group of, I believe it was 7, 8 of us, or
Yeah,
I'm trying to
7 or 8,
remember.
yeah,
Yeah.
7 or 8, yeah.
And yeah, if anybody has the opportunity, there's nothing like seeing firsthand. I still can't articulate just, how often you're just saying, oh my God, like it's nothing, whatever you can imagine, it's a million times worse, and I still can't put it into words. I'm still working on a piece. It's just that hard. And I guess one thing I have a hard time, because I do have some strong Zionists that still kind of go at me, and I have a hard time articulating, I know what I saw, and it's, like I said, it's, a million times worse than I could have imagined. But how do we what exactly happens with the blocking of the water in the medical care? I know that there's an aquifer and but I just wonder if you could elaborate on, I know even and you can articulate it better than I, but sometimes, the Zionists that attack us are really good at saying, well, it's their fault, or they could get the stuff, or they can move, or this and that. So I just want to know in a nutshell the top 3 things: clean water, medical care, just so I have more ammo. If you could elaborate on how that's
Sure.
done.
Sure. Well, it's done. The water issue is done in probably the most simple way, because all of the water is governed by the Israeli Water Authority. So obviously, as soon as the State of Israel was established, that they gained the right to distribute and dig and water, and divert the water and so on and so forth. So that has been the case from the beginning, and they allocate the water based on the way that their own policies. In 1967, when the West Bank was taken, then one of the largest water bodies of water is the mountain aquifer, which is in the West Bank. And one of the first things the military did after the 1967 war is declare that all the water belongs to Israel. So Palestinians have to buy water from Israel. Now, there's a reality in which, for example, like I said, the Gaza Strip has no access to clean water. Israel controls the flow of clean water. In the Gaza Strip, 98% of the water that is in the Gaza Strip is unfit for human consumption. 98%. We're talking about 2 million people. But outside of the Gaza Strip, in the Negev Desert, which makes up almost half of the country, the Jewish communities, Jewish farms, Jewish cities, there's plenty of water, there's no problem. The Palestinian Bedouin communities do not have access to water. Now, they have a large, or about half of the population of the Palestinians in the south live in towns that have been declared as unrecognized. even though they predate the state of Israel. You have hundreds of thousands of people living in towns that are unrecognized, which means they get no services, no water, no electricity, no schools, no access to healthcare, no pharmacies, no roads, ambulances can't reach them. In order to get water, they need to walk or drive miles away to a water distribution point and buy water at inflated prices. Now, these are very poor communities. These are communities that have already been kicked out of their land, or communities, like I said, that are living in conditions that are unrecognized, so they have nothing. They have no access to education, no access to jobs, no access to agriculture, and so forth. The Negev Desert is actually a very fertile desert. It's a very fertile land, but all the fertile parts were taken in order to build Jewish-only communities. So even though the Bedouin are traditionally engaged in agriculture, they have no access to that. They're not permitted to engage in agriculture. And now they are Israeli citizens, not like the people in the Gaza Strip that have no citizenship and are not allowed to, are not Israeli citizens. These are Israeli citizens, and if you remember that, we met them in the Negev Desert. We met with some of their leaders. So in order to have access to water, you have to have conditions that allow the water to reach you. You have to have the infrastructure. You have to live in a community where that exists. They live in communities where that does not exist. In order to have roads, you have to live in a community where there's infrastructure and roads are built. They build the roads in the communities where the Jewish-only communities, but not in the Palestinian Arab one. And when we were in the Negev Desert, we were standing on a hill, and you can see the beautiful green communities that are the Israeli Jewish-only communities, and right next to them, communities with the highest poverty rate, highest unemployment rate, and they're right next to them. In other words, share the wealth, share the water. Why do they have to be segregated? Why can't they live in the same community? Well, because racism is one of the founding blocks of the state of Israel. So that's how these things are denied. They're denied in a very sophisticated way. But basically, Israel controls all of the water. Israel decides where healthcare clinics are going to be built, where pharmacies are going to be built, where roads are going to be built. And they're always built where there's easy access to the Jewish Israeli population, and either very difficult or impossible or no access to the Palestinians, depending on where the Palestinians live.
Okay. Thank you for that. I've got David, then Brendan. Before David goes, does anybody else want on stack?
Maurice Spike stack.
Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead, David.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for doing this call, Miko. I agreed with everything you said. My name's David Rold. I'm from Massachusetts, from the
Something's wrong.
It keeps telling me I'm muted.
You're
Now,
not.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So my question or comments are about the Green Party U.S. platform position on what they call the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I'm looking at the platform page now, which I think is the current platform, and I like a lot of it, especially the part about the right of return, that it's feasible, the right and feasibility of the Palestinian refugees to return to their homes throughout Palestine. But the platform just isn't framed like in an anti-colonial way, like refer to Palestine as Israel-Palestine or Palestine-Israel several times, and it starts with, we reaffirm the right of self-determination for both Palestinians and Israelis, which precludes the self-determination of one at the expense of the other. So it's like equating the national rights of the colonized and the colonizer. There shouldn't be like rights to like Israeli national identity on stolen land in Palestine. And like the last part of the platform on the the Truth and Reconciliation Commission says the inaugurating action would be mutual acknowledgement by Israelis and Palestinians that they have the same basic rights, including the right to exist in the same secure place. So, like, the platform is like calling for the right of that Israeli nation to exist in Palestine, or like a binational kind of thing, which doesn't seem quite right. So recently, there was going to be a conference in Boston, and somebody from Jewish Voice for Peace was going to be the speaker on Palestinian rights, and I objected to my Green Party chapter endorsing, because Jewish Voice for Peace is a Zionist group that calls for that recognizes a Jewish national right in Palestine, and it's hard for me to do that when the Green Party platform is similar. The only way the Green Party platform is better is that it's very explicit about the right of return for Palestinians. So I'm wondering if we could have a campaign to try to improve the Green Party platform, or what you think about this problem, or maybe it's not a problem for you. Thanks.
Well, I don't know how the platform gets written. My understanding with the Green Party platform is that it supports a single democracy with equal rights, and adopted the call for BDS, which is why I joined the Green Party. In terms of how you get things changed or what exactly the specifics are, I really can't comment because I don't know. The JVP is not a Zionist organization, but it's not a non-Zionist organization. In other words, it's an organization that hasn't defined itself in that way, which I think is wrong. But there are many members within the JVP that are just as ardently anti-Zionist as I am. So, it all depends on who shows up and who it is that's speaking. I will tell you that now, JVP, along with the American Friends Service Committee, who are Quakers, along with several Christian organizations, have been banned by the government of Israel from entering the country. And recently, a member of Knesset, Yusuf Jabarin, Diane, we met him, if you remember, when we were up in Fahm. He was invited to give a lecture tour here in the United States, sponsored by JVP. And the Knesset, the Israeli Parliament Ethics Committee, they have an ethics committee, surprisingly enough. The ethics committee determined that he's not allowed to go because JVP is on is on the list of banned organizations. So there, he, as a member, as a parliamentarian, is not permitted to come to the United States and speak because it's sponsored by JVP. This is just how insanely absurd that place is, and how insanely absurd ways that they function. And they think that and I think the ridiculous thing is that they think they can prevent people from learning about the reality in Palestine because they either don't allow Palestinians to come and speak outside, or they don't allow foreigners to come in and take a look, which are both absurd. But, going back to your question, I mean, I don't know enough about how these things work. My understanding is that the Green Party platform does recognize a single democracy solution and the call for BDS.
It does. There are a lot of good things in it. It's not really anti-colonial. And on JVP also support the regime change project in Syria. But they do some good things too. So I hear this is all nuanced. I hear you.
So I can clarify on the platform. It is presently being amended for 2018. I am not sure. I haven't looked through all of the amendments. I'm not sure if there is anything that touches this topic. But I do think it would be a good idea for the people on this call. The next time it'll be up is 2020, before our next presidential cycle. So for that, submissions from state parties and caucuses will come in late 2019, and then that'll all be done and ratified in the summer at our convention. So, in the long term, I think the caucuses and committees on this call should, one, keep doing this work for that period, but then when that time comes, we should consult with Miko and some other people and see how we can do this, because there's a lot. The Green Party platform is very complex. There's a lot of things put in it um, from different perspectives. So I think on that topic, that's something that all the people on this call and the committees and organizations involved should keep in mind going forward. I've got Brendan on stack. Anybody else want to get on stack?
I just wanted to do have a direct response uh, pertaining,
Go ahead.
a couple of things. So let's please remember that as far as I think it's fabulous that we're dealing with these things, but this particular call it's not necessarily meant to be Green Party specific solely. We wanted to really offer the platform to the public so that the public at large could be educated, and so that while I believe that the work that needs to be done inside the party to make sure that the details that are being addressed, even in the question that was just raised, but that's not the only question, which we know is a work in progress, are dealt with. And I would even dare to suggest that that could be part of perhaps one of the remaining calls, if we wanted to. The working group can take that into consideration. But I would encourage folks to realize that, at least in theory, we were hoping for this to be a specific educational theory, not so much, session, not so much about the Green Party per se, but mostly about, educating the party membership about Palestine and the public at large. So while I think it's fantastic, and everyone on this call who knows me knows how long I've been waiting for the opportunity to move forward on improving aspects of our platform that need improving, how much work I've done to do that within the Jill Stein campaign, et cetera, et cetera. But I just wanted to make sure that, the people that we told to come to the call and not necessarily fear that this would be, really top-heavy Green Party specific, are taken into consideration as we proceed with the questions. And sorry, that was a little bit long-winded. Over.
So I've got Brendan and Marie. Anybody else want on stack before Brendan goes? Go ahead, Brendan.
All right, thank you. So like most of us, I think, probably all know about the billions of dollars that the United States sends to Israel in aid. I think we probably know about the United States using its veto power on issues related to Israel and Palestine. What are some other ways that the U.S. plays a role in this? What's going on out there? And what is the United States' role in all of this? Over.
Wow, that's the that's the billion-dollar question. There's the official $3.8 billion a year in foreign aid, which should raise a lot of questions because Israel is a very wealthy country, and so why is it being provided with foreign aid? I mean, we know that there are some very poor countries around the world who could use that money, and not only is Israel being provided with foreign aid, it is the largest recipient of foreign aid in the world. And again, Israel has been pretty much from the very beginning a wealthy economy and a strong economy with a big army and so forth. So that's one question, but that's the official. Now, besides that, another very troubling aspect of the finances is that there are billions of dollars being funneled to Israel through tax-exempt, not-for-profit organizations. That's billions of dollars of money that, I mean, if you want to give money to the Nazi Party or something, then maybe that's your right, but you shouldn't be getting a tax write-off, right? That's essentially what's happening, and you've got organizations and companies. The president's son-in-law's family is heavily involved in that. David Friedman, who's the ambassador to Tel Aviv, is they've been funneling millions and millions of dollars to the most extreme, the most violent, the most radical groups in Israel. The Kushners and the Friedmans have been involved, if I'm not mistaken, with Bet El, which is is a settlement that was built, excuse me, a settlement that was built smack right in the middle of pretty much Ramallah, and have known to produce some of the most extreme right-wing Israeli terrorists. So I mean, that's the kind of thing that's, and we're talking about billions of dollars beyond the 3.8 billion official foreign aid that goes there. And then you've got other issues like how does foreign policy in America get determined? I think it's absolutely clear today that the foreign policy team is the president's son-in-law, who has very strong connections, again, to the most right-wing groups within the state of Israel. And mind you, Israel is already as right-wing as you could possibly imagine a state to be. And we're talking about the most radical, the most extreme groups within that reality. And we know they have very close relations with Netanyahu and his family and so forth. So the foreign policy is being determined and being established based on that, based on strong belief in Zionism, and based on the sense that, you know, we have a right to, Americans should be supporting the most radical with groups within that very radical state. And then you've got all these alliances that Israel has been creating, working on for decades in the countries surrounding, in the Arab world. So you've got alliances, you've got monarchies like Jordan and the Gulf, and then you've got military dictatorships like in Egypt, and they've been developing very strong alliances to the point where today, Benjamin Netanyahu recently said, Israel's relations with the Arab world has never been better. Now, it's true. It's shocking, but it's true. Because they have managed to cultivate reactionary leaders, military dictators around them that are bribable, that are quite happy to see the Palestinians being thrown out of the bus, who care nothing for the Palestinians, who care nothing for human rights, who care nothing for their own people. Again, Saudi Arabia, some of the Gulf states, Jordan, Egypt, etc. And so that is also part of that, how America is involved with what's going on there, because it's American money that's going there, it's American weapons that are being sold there, it's relationships with these countries, you know. And again, I mentioned Iran earlier. They talk about Iran being this terrible tyranny. What is Saudi Arabia exactly? Some kind of a progressive democracy? I mean, what are they talking about? The regime in Saudi Arabia has no legitimacy. It's a family that took over the Arabian Peninsula, and thanks to the Zionists and thanks to the Brits, were allowed to create their own kingdom there. You know, the same with Jordan. What is the Hashemite kingdom? This is some guy who calls himself a prince, who came from the Arabian Peninsula, was placed in Amman, which was a small little village, and now he's a king, and they have a kingdom, and so forth. But these are kings. They're really kings. In other words, they're dictators. It's absurd. We're in the 21st century, and people are still walking around bowing their heads, Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness, and they are the rulers. But these are rulers that Israel likes, and therefore America likes. As opposed to, say, countries that Israel didn't like, and that America has to dislike, which are now destroyed, like Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen. These are typically countries whose regimes perhaps were not completely enlightened, the most enlightened either, but they stood up. They stood up to Israel, and they stood up and supported the Palestinians. So today those countries are destroyed, and the message that Netanyahu sent very clearly in his speech in D.C. at AIPAC last week was very, very clear. The countries that are linked, according to him, to Iran are Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Gaza, Lebanon, and therefore these are countries that we should continue to destroy and destabilize. And when he mentioned Yemen, that was also a wink to the new crown prince in Saudi Arabia, saying, feel free to keep bombing as long as we warm up relations, and I, as the Prime Minister of Israel, can show that now the largest and one of the most important Arab countries in the world, Saudi Arabia, has close relations with Israel. And again, I don't think anybody would be surprised that pretty soon they will open an embassy. So this is the other way that, first of all, Israel influences American foreign policy, and America influences what goes on in the area because, of course, America's got the weapons and the money and so forth. And this is a very, very troubling reality because we're talking about a reality that's being determined by people who, number one, have no understanding of the region, have no care for human rights, have no care for the rights of the Palestinians, and are quite happy to work with the most corrupt, most reactionary tyrants in the world, and yet treat them as though they are some kind of, moderate, friendly Arabs, moderate, friendly tyrants, which of course they're not. So that is the kind of the strange, circle of events, between Washington, Tel Aviv, and the Arab capitals.
Thank you.
Sure.
I've got Marie, then Joy. Anybody else for Stack?
CMB
Go ahead.
Stack.
Okay, I got CMB. Go ahead, Marie.
First, I wanted to thank Miko so much for being on this call. I've been a fan of yours for years, and you're a role model for me. Thank you so much.
Kind. Thank you.
I wanted to just address the Greens for a moment here about a situation in Michigan, and I think you'd be interested in this as well, Miko. That was very disturbing to me. There's a woman running for governor on the Green Party ticket. Her name is Jennifer Kurland, and she won't endorse BDS or the Green Party platform on Israel. And I challenged her, and I was amazed that I'm new to Michigan. I moved to Michigan in August from Florida, and I became active right away. So I kind of walked into this not realizing what I was walking into, but I was attacked by this faction who is supporting Jennifer Kurland's candidacy for governor on the Green Party ticket. And I was viciously attacked for challenging her on the BDS issue with one other person. And some of you know Luann Kozma. She's she's on the National Green Party Committee. They tried to drive her out of the party, this faction. And when I mentioned, I asked, and this is all on Facebook with me anyway, if AIPAC was involved in any way with these candidates. And that's when they started calling me names, and I said that I was going to sue them for slander. I actually looked for an attorney because the vicious attacks. She's still running. I don't know if she's going to get the nomination. But I suspect that AIPAC is working within the Green Party, definitely in Michigan, because with Luann, who's a very active Green, she also is, and she's running a anti-fracking campaign. She's extremely active, and they actually tried to drive her out of the party. So I just wanted to alert other people, other Greens from different states, to be wary.
So is she the nominee for the Green Party, or is she running to become the nominee for the Green Party?
She's running, and the nomination, I think it's the meeting is next month sometime. I'm going to go to the meeting, but it was not only she, it was the Green Party chairperson who was supporting her of Michigan. Now, I just went to my first meeting, state meeting a couple of weeks ago, and luckily the woman, Sherry Wells is her name, she was not voted in again as the Michigan chairperson. I don't know how many other people in Michigan are aware of what was going on, but I did my best online, and I did my best to tell people, and I will show up at the meeting. and I think Luann will too, but we took a beating from these people. And it's a faction. It's a Zionist faction within the Green Party of Michigan. Over.
Okay. I would say that um, the youth caucus can probably look and see if we have anybody in Michigan that can help you too, Marie, in our lists. But yeah.
Yeah.
So, Miko, do you have anything quick in response to that before we move and finish up the stack?
Well, I think, well, it's very troubling. There's no question,
Yeah.
and I can see, Marie's troubled by this, and I would be too. I don't know again how how these things work within the party. I'd be happy to participate in any way if I could contribute to this issue. I will say this: there is no doubt in my mind, and there shouldn't be the doubt in anybody else's mind, that whether it's AIPAC or the Anti-Defamation League or some other Zionist group is going to do everything they can in order to enter the Green Party and to have an influence on Green Party policy and on Green Party candidates. Look, they invite every member of every city council, every mayor, and every police chief of every city in America to a trip to Israel. They're not going to stop at the with the Green Party. They're going to come in and they're going to try to do the same with the Green Party, and they will succeed. At least with some people, with some candidates, they will succeed because a lot of people are on the fence. A lot of people don't realize that supporting Israel is supporting racism and violence. A lot of people think still that there's this kinder, sweeter, kind of angelic version to the state of Israel, and they're hoping that maybe if they influence them, they could, do that. So I think that's really, really important to understand. How we fight it is we have to stand up and be vigilant and make sure that they do not have a voice and they do not get a platform. And again, how the Green Party works and does that's a question that's a bit beyond beyond me, but I'd be happy to contribute to this.
Well, I just want to say that Dr. Jill, in one of her interviews or one of her fireside chats, was proudly saying that Jennifer Kurland is running. She doesn't know, and I made a comment on the, on the Facebook chat part when she was giving her fireside chat. But I have no way of getting in touch with Dr. Jill, and I don't, I've asked around. But
Did you tell him?
Hello?
I don't know what that was.
I don't know if anyone knows how to get in touch, if Dr. Jill has an email, but she was proudly announcing that Jennifer Kurland was running because Jennifer Kurland have worked closely with her on her campaign.
Okay.
And I don't think she knows.
Chris,
Okay.
Adrian, direct response.
So we're gonna move on from this.
A point of clarification, Chris, because I think it's important.
Yeah.
So folks, we have to remember a couple of things. Number one, again, please keep in mind what I said before, that all of these issues are important, but the intention is not so much to examine and deconstruct from within the party, where our challenges lie, and these are many. And I'm going to very quickly address two things, also for Miko's benefit as a new member of the party. As a loose federation of parties, our ability to as a national party to basically execute and implement a national policy, no matter what the platform says, remains questionable. Right now, the only thing that can happen here is to continue to educate and organize. It is imperative that we keep that in mind, and it's also imperative to remember that we did not have a very clear, BDS supporting platform, or even a very clear platform in 2012. Okay, I mean, there was a lot of work that needed to be done. Now, the Green Party has come a long way, but it's a work in progress. So, again, I think that Chris said it very clearly. It is important for the folks who believe that that there are issues either in your states or at the national party to remember that we need to table that. This is not to say that, this is not important to deal with, but if we go down that route, I think we're not doing, the intentions of this particular call justice. And I can commit as a member, as a national delegate member, to try to coordinate an ongoing discussion so that none of these things that are being raised fall by the wayside. But I am asking kindly for folks to remember that we want this to be an educational call about Palestine and not so much about our internal party issues and how far we've come or how far we still have to go. So please keep that in mind. And again, you have my commitment that none of this stuff is going to go unaddressed. And we can definitely follow up with every single one of you, over the next couple of weeks to make sure that happens within the party. Over.
Okay, so I have Joy and then CMB, and then it's getting late, and I think we're gonna cut the stack there. So Joy, go ahead, and then CMB.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I want to say thank you for coming on our call and bringing awareness to what's happening to the children in Palestine. Because when we hear stories about that, they're usually forgotten about. And some of these children, they're witnessing horrific atrocities that have happened to their friends and their family members. And, their sense of normalcy has pretty much disappeared. And so, like when we came out in support of Ahead Tamimi, we received a lot of interesting feedback, but, we stand by our support for her. And then we also call for awareness of HR 4391, which would prohibit U.S. assistance to Israel from being used to support the military detention, interrogation, or the ill treatment of Palestinian children in violation of international humanitarian law. So, I really appreciate what's happening, and some people are also kind of surprised about there are Black people that are supporting Palestinians, right? And also like that was a history where there were Palestinian Black Panthers, which some people may not be aware of. And, like down here in Texas, during Hurricane Harvey, some of our contractors were not going to be paid if they participated in BDS, which just was horrific because, down here in Texas, we were suffering. So I just wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing. I know it's not easy, and I know you probably get attacks from all sides, but thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for being in the Green Party. Over.
Thank you.
Okay, do you have any response to that quickly, Miko, before we go to the last person?
Just that there's absolutely no surprise that there are black people, that there are blacks who support the Palestinian cause because it's the exact same struggle. It's a struggle of oppressed people. And, Black Lives Matter have been to Palestine and have received all kinds of crazy responses from the Zionists about this. But I think it's the same struggle. It's a collaboration that makes absolute perfect sense. And I think the more that collaboration it becomes strong, let me be a little more blunt. I think once Black America realizes that the Palestinian cause is their cause, it'll be a game changer. And I think that is the absolute one of the most important things that any of us can do is to make that happen.
Thank you. CMB, you're our last question for Miko. Go ahead. You there, Corey? Nope.
What's up?
You're up.
Oh, hey, sorry, I stepped away from the phone for a second. So, my question earlier was Miko brought up that APAC just recently met, and Netanyahu, of course, he mentioned his speech there. The reason I wanted to bring this up is a lot of the discussion tonight has been centered around or at least in regards to American relations with Israel. The announcement of moving the embassy and the current presidential administration's support for Israel as a state. But a lot of the things, like the recent increase in aid, happened in the tail end of Obama's last year in office. Many of the biggest recipients of money from APAC tend to be Democrats. My question is, I guess, how can we fight this issue on both sides when this is something that maybe not the majority of Americans agree with, but nearly our entire elected political body at the national level is supporting, both the Republicans and Democrats, and in the context of what's happened at Parkland and the school shootings and the opposition to the NRA, what can we do to mobilize people in our communities against APAC and I guess against Zionism in general, in the way that people have finally become mobilized against the NRA and the message that they've been pushing. I'm not sure if we, need a Parkland shooting to get people mobilized or some event like that, but is there anything that we can do in our communities to support BDS and fight the messaging and propaganda that APAC is pushing?
Well, the Israeli lobby and the NRA have a lot in common, but probably the most striking thing they have in common is a complete disregard for human life. And I think that needs to be made absolutely clear. The state of Israel is a racist entity. Supporting it is supporting racism. That has to be made and explained over and over again in the clearest term. It's got nothing to do with politics. This has only to do with your value system. You either oppose racism or you support racism. There's no gray area here. There's no fence here that you can sit on. And that's how it should be presented. Supporting Israel is supporting racism and violence. All the excuses and the stories and the apologies, it's all lies. Lies, lies, lies. There is no way to justify racism and violence. There just isn't, unless you are racist and you believe that that's how, that's your value system. And that's how it should be presented, I think, in the clearest terms, in the most in the most honest terms, without being afraid, without wavering. Israel is apartheid South Africa. Of course, apartheid is an uglier name. Israel is kind of a beautiful Jewish, biblical kind of a name, so sometimes it's harder for people to come out against it. But it has to be made in the most clear terms. Supporting Israel is supporting racism. And if you choose to support racism, then that demonstrates that those are your values. Supporting Israel is supporting violence, because racist regimes are typically violent regimes, and they always lie. So this is a question of values, and any member of Congress, any elected official, any city council member, any mayor, any police chief that chooses to support Israel and to go on these trips has to be called out in no uncertain terms. That they are supporting violence and racism, and they will be called out. That's the way to do it. Keep it simple, keep it honest, keep it truthful, and don't be afraid to say these exact very words. Now I'm losing my voice here, so I'm going to have to bow out.
Thank you so much.
So thank you all very much for that.
Thank you, Miko. Thank you, everybody, for coming on the call. It's been great to have everybody here for a discussion. So our next call is on Monday, March 26th at 9:15 It's on the topic of campus anti-fascism with Mel Figueroa of the Campus Anti-Fascist Network. And then in April, we have 2 more of these Justice and Liberation for Palestine calls on the 9th of April and on the 23rd of April. Both those calls will be at 9:15 Eastern. You can go to the Youth Caucus's Facebook page to find those links. And thank you again so much, everybody, for coming. Have a good night.